Well guys, things are ramping up for 2024's two big Middle-earth projects. With Season 2 of Rings of Power starting in late August, and New Line Cinema's The War of the Rohirrim coming to theaters in December, we're starting to see more marketing beats for each. We've got one for each to cover, and I'll release a video covering the Rings of Power images next, but first up we're diving into the Rohirrim images. This new look came a couple weeks ago in the form of an Entertainment Weekly article about War of the Rohirrim. This piece not only included new interviews about the film, but also the first stills from the actual film. First up, we've got an image from inside the Golden Hall of Meduseld in Edoras. Here we have King Helm Hammerhand on his throne, his daughter Hera on the left of the frame, and two younger men on the right, presumably Helm's sons. While Hera is an original name, as Helm's daughter goes unnamed in the books, we do know his sons' names are Haleth and Hama. Fun fact, Hama is also the name of the door warden in the Two Towers. Another character sure to be very important in this family is Helm's nephew, Freyalof. Now the thing that immediately jumps out in this image is that the design of the room and character clothing definitely feels in line with what we saw in the Peter Jackson trilogy. Everything feels Rohirric. Upon closer inspection, I found it's not just a feeling of similarity. Helm's throne is in fact the exact throne design, albeit now in animated form, that we see for Theoden in The Lord of the Rings. The standing horses for armrests and the ornate seat back are a clear replication. Personally, I think it's really cool to see this attention to detail in making this feel connected to the existing films. Helm looks like quite the mountain of a man in this image, which, considering what he'll later do, seems appropriate. His hair is full-on white, which makes sense as the king is 68 years old at the time of these events. He's a character who comes to the throne later in life, at the age of 50. For reference, Theoden is 71 years old during the events of the books, but has ruled since he was just 32 years old. Back to the image at hand, this could come at a pivotal moment in the film, where the conflict really starts to come to the forefront. My guess is it could be the moment when Freka, a lord of the Dunlendings, seeks Hera's hand in marriage for his son Wolf, who we'll get a look at in a moment. The next image we have is Hera with her sword drawn, and one of the most noticeable features here is the sword itself. It's a bit hard to tell here, but the sword looks like it could be very similar in design to Theoden's from the films. Incidentally, Theoden's is one of my absolute favorite swords across all the films. Over her left shoulder, we see what could be a Rohan soldier. The blue and white color scheme is interesting, as we haven't seen blue used with the Rohirrim in adaptations, where the focus is usually more on deep greens and reds paired with gold. Personally, I think this might be our first look at Freyalof, Hera's cousin. As I mentioned earlier, I think he's one who should play a significant role in this story if done properly, given his importance in the later stages. As for those over Hera's right shoulder, we get a group of people bearing spears and donning some kind of animal skulls over their faces. My first inclination is that these are groups of Dunlendings, the people of Freka and Wolf who are in conflict with Rohan at multiple points throughout history. In the films, these are the people we see swear loyalty to Saruman, and that the wizard whips into a frenzy before sending them out to raid villages in Rohan. These people will serve as the main antagonists of this tale. Of course, it's been revealed in previous concept art, they'll have some aid in the form of the Haradrim and their Mumakil. The other prevailing theory about these characters is that they could actually be on Hera's side in this image, which has led some to believe they could be the Druidine, the people of Gonborigan during the time of the Return of the King. Personally, I lean more toward this being Dunlendings, as it would be the more obvious choice. Another big question in regards to this image is where it's located. The three most prominent locations likely to play a part in the film are three that we saw in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Edoras, the Rohan capital, the Soothburg, later to be renamed Helm's Deep, and Dunharrow, where we saw the mustering of the Rohirrim in the Return of the King. The stone ramp and wall in the background immediately gave me Helm's Deep vibes. Should this be the case, it would make complete sense for the background characters to be Dunlendings, and for these structures to be their camps as they lay siege to the fortress. Should this be the case, it would mean Hera would remain with her father and brothers in the fortress, and probably rule out this background character being Freyalof, as he was known to have led the survivors of Edoras to Dunharrow. Finally, we have an image of Wolf, who will be the main antagonist of the film. As was discussed in my interview with Philippa Boyens and screenwriters Artie Papagiorgio and Phoebe Gittins, Wolf is a character who is somewhat thrust into this conflict by the actions of his father Freka and those of Helm. While this would make for a conflicted character in the film's early goings, my conversation with the trio who worked on the film's story indicated that once Wolf makes his choice, there's no turning back for him. I'm definitely expecting a dark tale from this Middle-earth villain. As for Wolf's location here, the stone in the far background once again leads me to believe it may be taking place at Helm's Deep as well. Perhaps it's Wolf who Hera is holding a sword to in the previous image. Real quick, one thing I don't have enough expertise to comment on is how this compares to other anime in terms of look. I've never really gotten into anime. I've seen a couple of projects here and there, and that's about it. I'm very curious to see how Middle-earth does in this format though, and I think animation too often doesn't get the respect it deserves. Whether it's anime, other types of animation, or stop motion, there's way too many films and series that don't get the attention they deserve because they're written off as being for kids, when these filmmaking techniques often deliver so much more. Alright, with that soapbox moment and that relatively spoiler-free section out of the way, I want to dive into some spoiler-filled speculation, so consider yourself warned here. While this could be Wolf at Helm's Deep, I would expect that at some point he will make his way back to Edoras, as the final conflict in the books does occur there. After the Dunlendings sack Edoras, Wolf sets himself up in the Golden Hall. As winter gives way to spring, Freyalof and a group of Rohirrim come to Edoras from Dunharrow and reclaim the city, with Freyalof personally stabbing Wolf through the neck with his sword, killing the usurper. With Helm and his sons having died at the fortress soon to be known as Helm's Deep, Freyalof becomes the 10th king of Rohan. With Helm's line ended, Freyalof takes leadership, starting the second line of the kings, which would continue for generations down to Theoden. In light of Freyalof's impending reign, my guess is that there's a small chance this sword we see held by Hera could be either hers or Freyalof's. Perhaps it's hers, which passes to Freyalof at Hera's own death, and he would then pass it down his line to Theoden. Of course, it could just have similar design elements and be totally unconnected to Theoden's later sword. We certainly see Rohirrim buried with their swords, specifically Theoden's son Theodred in the Two Towers. Still, I'm very curious to see how the story is wrapped up. The biggest question mark being what Hera's fate will be. We have nothing to go on for Helm's unnamed daughter. Whether she survived, where she went after the initial events of the story, we have nothing. We only know that Helm and his sons die and that Freyalof is the one who succeeds him. Now, there's been some conversation around the fact that Hera will be the main character of this film, and I can understand that hesitation to a certain extent. She is an unnamed and minor character in the short, highlight-level view of the story, but personally, I'm always going to be one who waits for something to come out before judging it. I gotta say though, I think the only other character that would make sense as the main character would be Freyalof. I've seen a good number of people saying how Hera has replaced Helm as the main character, and in my opinion, that was never really the way to go with this story. Again, spoilers here, but Helm is likely going to die well before the climax of this film. Obviously, you can have a story where the main character dies, but it's not often that they're absent from what, in this case, could feasibly be the entire third act. Like Theoden in The Lord of the Rings, I think Helm can work wonderfully as a secondary character who we experience loss with and loss of. While he may not be the main focal point in the film, I would be shocked if Helm were reduced to a minor role. And honestly, I think using a character without a larger-than-life presence as the focal point could help with being our eyes into the world as well. In the end, I think any really good Middle-earth adaptation will have at least a handful of characters of focus, both primary and secondary, equally capable of giving moments of heroism and tragedy, bravery and sorrow, hatred and love. This project has been one I've looked forward to ever since it was announced. I think retelling an isolated story that doesn't need to concern itself with Sauron or the One Ring has the potential to really free itself from the burden of expectation to match the films for scale and scope. Instead, it can focus on the story and characters in this particular tale, not trying to tie it into a story that it doesn't belong to. I'll be honest, my hype level is unimpeded at this point, and as high as it's ever been. I've heard good things coming out of the early glimpses at things like Annecy, and don't see any reason to not go in with some level of optimism. It certainly has a quality team behind it, and we're already seeing the kind of attention to detail that helped make the Lord of the Rings film so great. It's been 10 years since the last Middle-earth film, and 21 since we last saw the Rohirrim in a new film. Personally, I'm beyond ready to sit in a movie theater in December and hear that Rohan theme as we're taken to the land of the Horse Lords once more. But now I turn it to you. What do you guys think of this first look of War of the Rohirrim? Are you pumped or are you nervous? Let me know in the comments. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.